Well, good morning. We are Fleet Street Communications, and we're going to run you through our presentation. Let me just share where we are. Okay, so yeah, this is a 100-day playbook from Fleet Street Communications. My name's Kay Rawlings. I'm the Senior Account Director at Fleet Street Communications.
And I'm Jeff Campion, and I'm an account director at Fleet Street Communications, which is a specialist food, drink, and hospitality agency.
So we're going to sort of run through this, hopefully give you a little bit of added value. I'm not going to run through the slides in too much detail, but hopefully explain it a little bit further. So first to kick off, what is public relations? Hopefully you've heard of that. The classic explanation is it's all about a way an organisation or your business will communicate with the public and manage their reputation and build a positive reputation in itself. Actually, a term that we use quite commonly is earned media. And this is all around sort of earning your way into the hearts and minds of your audience. And this is essentially making your messages work harder for you. So whereas marketing and advertising, there's more kind of pay, you essentially have to pay to have your messages out there, and you have a lot of control over your messages. With public relations and media, it's all about sort of telling your story and getting it out there by earning value. So how can you actually, what can you get from earned media? So this is all about talkability. And it gets people talking about you, it taps into what's happening culturally, but most importantly, and I think, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later, particularly in the current climate, this really helps protect you against sort of any risk to your reputation. And in terms of what it can't do, I won't go into too much detail, but essentially this isn't propaganda, this is about telling a story. You can't necessarily control all of the messages that people are talking about you. And you know, if you think you have a story, it isn't necessarily going to cut through if it's not engaging and it's not relevant to your audience. So that's where it's really important to kind of look at your strategy, and we'll go through some of the things that you can think about. Now, Cam Media earlier on in this deck talk a lot about audience. In fact, I think most of the agencies who've inputted into this presentation, this playbook, have talked about audience, and that's as true for public relations and media. So what are your audience reading? How are they consuming content? This is all stuff that you should really think about. And in terms of the media space, you're really kind of playing in the news media area mostly. And that's where, you know, we can kind of land stories. You know, with the kind of on-demand self-published side of things, less so. But if you have a compelling story, the news media hopefully will pick it up. You know, obviously each are different. So whereas if you're targeting a 25-year-old London-based consumer, they may be, and they're interested in events, it might be Time Out. If you're looking at a kind of 60-year-old man living in Devon who likes more long-formed opinion pieces, you might be looking at the Times or the Guardian or something like that. So it's really important to have a think about what they're actually reading and how they're consuming it. And that will help you deliver your story. So we're going to go through this in a bit more detail, but essentially here are a few key elements that will help you create an impactful media campaign. So number one, what is the actual story? So you think you've got a story, but how is that actually going to cut through? And is it going to be impactful and interesting to your audience? But also the gatekeepers, which are the journalists. And just to remember that they get a lot of stories coming through their inbox each day. So, you know, how are you going to get them excited? You've got the story. So how are you actually going to give it further impact? So you can do that through compelling content, and we'll talk through that in a little bit more detail. And then your supporting voices. So who are your advocates? Who are your spokespeople? How are you going to recruit them to make your campaign and your story even more impactful? And then as we said, be prepared. So making sure that you put the groundwork in ahead of doing anything to make sure that any issues or crises that may arise, you are all over it and you know what you're doing. So what makes a story? You think you have a story, but it's worth putting a few filters in place just to make sure that you're not sort of wasting your time. It is actually going to be engaging and interesting, and people are going to care. So is it a first? Is it unique? Not just for necessarily you, but is it for your region, your area? Is it for the UK? Is it for the world? That will help you sort of deliver to the right media as well. Is it hot right now? So, have people been talking about this for a long time already? Are we already experienced fatigue, or is this quite fresh? And is it going to sort of play in the kind of word of mouth space? And does anyone care? We know you do, but be critical. Does anyone else? So just make sure that you're kind of putting that filter, you're kind of putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And some of yes, go on.
I was going to say that final piece, does anyone care, is really important, because a lot of times you can be so close to a story and you've been with it from its infancy to sort of where the idea looks like it's coming to fruition. Take a second to sense check that with someone who might be removed from the business, or have a look through the target publication that you're hoping to get coverage in, whether that's a regional newspaper or whether that's a sort of national online site, and just sense check, have people covered similar stories? Are we completely on the right track here? And build in those checks and balances.
Yeah, I mean, we even have to do it sometimes just to make sure that, when you're so close to something, it's good to just take a step back. We've just popped in a few sort of areas that may work as a really great story. So it might be an exciting event, a new product, an amazing partnership. We're putting data and research here because actually that's the kind of stuff that journalists honestly do lap up, and just knowing what's happening, key trends, and what matters to the audience, what's the consumer value. That's always really interesting, especially if it's kind of culturally relevant as well. And is it a unique launch campaign? So here, that's a few elements that will kind of help you to build that story and make you kind of create something newsworthy. Now this is kind of, obviously, this is kind of a more a sort of annual look, a look to the future. What can you do over the next year or 2 years? And this is kind of the best case scenario. So we would advise that you'd have a mix between quick and dirty stories that you can turn around now within days, and ones that require bigger change and investment that you may come once a year, may come once every 5 years for you. But it's really nice to ensure that you have a consistent share of voice, throughout the year. You have a mix of those kind of stories. So the kind of go now stories are ones that require sort of little investment and time, but are usually kind of hot right now. So you can turn it around within a day or a couple of days. And I think we saw quite a few brands doing that within the first week of lockdown. Who would have known that was going to happen, but they turned these things around quite quickly, offering things for the NHS, etc. Go big, obviously this requires a little bit more time, a little bit more thought, and can last a little bit longer, so a month or 2 months, and it's something that you might want to do a couple of times a year. And then, as I said, go down in history campaigns, which will last for a long time and require quite significant change, but it might be worth sort of starting with those go now ones. What's kind of hot right now, as a tester. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about these campaigns, but these are a few campaigns with purpose that we've seen and we like, they're out there, just to give you a little taster. Because, and actually we could probably do a whole presentation around campaigns with purpose, but it kind of goes back to that piece around what actually matters to the audience. And it may not be directly linked to your venue, but it's something that you can talk about as a brand and that's relevant to your audience and that they care about and that you can get involved in. So, Long Live the Local campaign, you'll probably be aware of. Is it to do with the environment? Is it to do with food waste? Things that you can, and sort of not necessarily directly related to your menu, as I said, but something that you can kind of a space that you can play in, and that's meaningful. So it's definitely worth considering, and hopefully this gives you a little bit of inspiration. But what can you do without kind of coming up, without knowing who you are? It's difficult to kind of come up with different tactical ideas, but we've come up with a few here that could work for you. May not do, but might give you some inspiration, hopefully. But what we've done is, you have an idea. So, for example, celebrating unsung heroes of the pandemic. So, have a night on us. But how do you elevate that, and how do you amplify it? And then just making sure that you put those filters in as well. So, for example, we've put in an idea here around self-distancing speed dating. Once people are out of lockdown and want to kind of get together face-to-face after all of this virtual dating, how do you make it culturally relevant? Can you do a quirky red, yellow and green face mask, for example, or twist to the traffic light system? How can you amplify that using local influencers? And worth considering how you're going to capture that to get some cool content. So here are 3 very different ideas, hopefully give you a bit of inspo. But yeah, as I said, how do you amplify, how do you elevate, and how do you get it out there?
And just to add to that, Kate, ideas are really the sort of currency of PR and creative agencies, and that's sort of where if there's something that doesn't immediately spring to mind to you, approach an agency, see what thoughts they have, see what brainstorms, what value they can add, and don't be afraid to do that when you're sort of in the planning stages, because it might help flesh out some of the ideas a bit more.
Actually, it's a really good point, and just getting your whole team involved, because always kind of using the senior team isn't necessarily the right thing to do. You may be looking at sort of a younger audience, for example, so make sure that you get your kind of younger team involved so that you can understand what's interesting to them. So yeah, coming up with cool ideas is definitely worth getting everyone involved.
So I guess this is quite a well-trodden phrase, and it's something that sort of won't be new to all of you, that content is still very much king. I think what I'd sort of like to pull out and sort of reinforce from this is actually, I think, when you look at the role of a PR agency, there sometimes might be some misconceptions and maybe a hangover from the sort of ab fab era, that it is sort of wishy-washy, like fluffy, activity. But actually, what a PR agency should be doing is positively influencing your business's reputation, and that's done through content. And the way in which they do that isn't purely limited to how you're spoken about in the press. We'll go on to talk about it in the next slide in a bit more detail, but there is a plethora of different ways in which you can get your key messages out there to your sort of end user, or your sort of desired audience. And what a PR agency is there for is to help define those key messages that want to tell the story of your brand, want to make people feel a certain way about your brand. And then essentially we act as the gatekeepers. So if there's any comms that's going out, across social, or if there's anything that's going out via your blog, or if you're talking about anything at an event, or if you're attending a roundtable, or if we're going out proactively in a press release or a thought leadership article, those key messages, there needs to be consistency, and there needs to be a thought out structure in how they're delivered. And that's what you call a sort of PR agency to do. And that's how you harness the power of content to tell a story across a number of different channels. So, as I sort of touched on briefly there are a huge number of avenues from which you can sort of push out content and evoke feeling for your brand. One thing that I think Kay alluded to briefly there, in terms of making the most of your team when it comes to brainstorms, I think it's equally important that you look at how you can tap into the organic stories that are happening within your business. If you are working in head office, it doesn't matter how many times you're going out to sites, if you're a multi-site operator, or even if you're a single site operator, you can't see what's going on through every second of every day. So I think if you can find a way in which you encourage people to, share those organic stories. For example, it might be that, someone's, offered an NHS worker's family, or have organised through their own accord to do a prescriptions run. It might be something simple like that actually turns to a really nice story to push out across your social channels, or you can sort of elevate further. So find a way in which you can identify those stories that are happening through the floor, and then cascade them up throughout the business.
So we put in here the kind of formats that you can use to get your story out there. You've probably heard of the classic news release, and actually we put in a bit of a 10-step plan next, just to give you an idea. You may already have an idea, but for those who don't, the news release, that obviously goes out to your kind of list of media. And then actually a lot of the media, I'm just talk about forward features, they tend to have a features list for the year, especially in the trade media. So it's worth finding out about those, and whether you can identify different topics that you can talk about as an expert, and offer your expertise for those features. But also you've got opinion pieces, you have briefings, you have roundtables, and then if you are hopefully media trained, we'd always recommend people are media trained, but offering up interviews with your key spokespeople, just to offer that kind of colour, that extra colour and detail, from a real human. Because I think news releases, it's usually, we'll talk through, it's who, what, why, when, how, but with interviews and sort of quotes and things like that, it really adds that extra detail and colour to a story, and it is, again, additional content that really works really nicely. And then rich image and video content, which we talked about before, just in terms of the content piece.
Just on this as well, if you just go back quickly, Kay, I think the key thing with this is do your research. So if you want to be in a certain title, read that title, look at the stories which have been covered, which is similar to how you want to be portrayed, and then think creatively about how you can get in there. So, for example, it might be that, listicles are incredibly popular for online titles. If you have an outstanding sort of terrace area outside, maybe think outside the box and think, if you put together 5 of the best terrace areas in the city and then push that out as a pre-made story to the journalist, that's something where you can get coverage. But you've got to truly understand what opportunities there are with your target titles, and then you can look creatively about how you can secure that coverage.
So not teaching you to suck eggs, but just a key, like I mentioned before, journalists tend to get, up to about 500 emails a day pitching them stories. So you can imagine how many that they'll actually read through, and it's very rare that they'll read your email from start to finish. So you have to kind of capture them in the first couple of seconds with a really catchy headline that does indicate the story. And, it doesn't have to be a, tabloid style headline, with puns, etc. But just to make sure that they can, captures their attention straight and foremost. And then, in the first paragraph, really you want to get across, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. So that if that's all that they read, they understand what you're trying to say and what you're trying to tell them. So making sure that your most important stat is in there, your most important key message is in there. And then, essentially, you really need to make sure that you send some great assets with that. So a nice high-res image that hopefully tells the story in an image, which is quite an art in itself. But if you can manage that, that will help the journalist tell the story visually within their article. So worth thinking about that in detail.
And then just quickly on the image, always make sure when you have a caption with the image, because a lot of times people forget that. And if you can just give journalists a sort of ready to go story with the right sized image, a clear caption of who it is that's in the image, and all the information quickly, you'll drastically improve your chances of coverage.
I skipped over this actually, but the one of the tests, and it kind of goes back to the filter, is again, ask yourself, so what? You know, you think you've got a great story, so what? Does anyone care? Just make sure you ask yourself that. That will help you check the relevance and sense check the relevance. And then your spokespeople, your supporting voices. This is where you really build a lot of credibility. So whether that's your CEO, your MD, you know, the senior team, or experts that you've used throughout building a campaign, or building your menu, or building your, it might be the chef, it might be your expert mixologist. How can they comment on this story? How can they add value? And do they have a profile that will be of interest within the landscape? And then maybe the external influencers, for example, and talent, or your customers even. So getting their opinions and their thoughts on the subject will really elevate the story and add credibility and authenticity. But when it comes to, particularly with influencers and talent, don't fall into the trap of thinking, okay, the bigger the audience, the better. More and more these days, it's all, you know, the audience are so hyper aware of these sort of partnerships with talent and influencers. It's really important to make sure it makes sense for your brand. And it's not, you know, because it needs to be transparent, it needs to be authentic. And if it's not, it doesn't ring true with the audience. So it's important to think about that.
So even with the best will in the world, stuff will go wrong, and crisis situations occur. I think in a post-COVID world, what's going to be particularly clear is that emotions are very high. Cam Media will have alluded to it separately in the deck, but consumer confidence will be low, and there'll be a lot of people who are very nervous about going out to eat and drink out of home. Rightly so, due to the sort of ongoing narrative of what's been going on within the news. And when you add into this the volatile nature of the media at the moment, and the fact that scapegoats sort of are being made, I think it's a mixture and a recipe for potential disaster. And I think you just got to be cognizant of these facts when you're sort of reopening, and doing absolutely everything that's in your power to mitigate and to stop any potential crisis situations from occurring at source. And that sort of requires planning. You know, make no mistake, the world, and we're all aware of it, has fundamentally changed. And it's put a greater and heightened pressure on the potential and the propensity for a crisis situation. And I think that's just reinforced the importance of doing clear planning and having a clear protocol and procedure in place to make sure that you can limit any potential damaging impact of something that could occur. So what we've tried to do here is just put some clear stages in place and a bit of structure for you to look at and to think. And a lot of you will be doing this anyway, if not all of you. But hopefully it will crystallise some approaches and sort of give you some guidance on what to do. So I'll just run through that quickly now. So the first thing, and I think this quote sums it up really, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Just, you know, with all the best will in the world, once a crisis has happened, you know, it's too late to limit. It's too late to stop, anything from happening from a reputational point of view. The way in which you can, you know, tackle it is by looking at it and forecasting what potentially might happen early doors, and doing a sort of full risk audit to look at what potential crisis or what potential situations might happen and how you can stop them and prevent them from happening. Obviously, there's a sort of big operational challenge that we're all going to overcome once pubs and bars and restaurants reopen. And there's a lot of things operationally to think about that weren't there before, such as 2-meter social distancing. Maybe it will be reduced to 1 meter. Time will tell. And the looking at how we can and how you can forecast any potential challenges to this and stop them from happening is absolutely crucial. So I think with the new operational challenges that come into place, please do have your sort of crisis hat on and thinking when you're introducing these measures. So I presume, when we're looking at it from a marketing point of view, having really clear advice on what you're doing from a cleaning perspective and how you're dealing with hygiene is something that is going to be increasingly focused and being increasing focus when you do reopen. Think about how, if for example, there is a break, or if, for example, there is a challenge that you encounter with someone breaking the 2-meter or the social distancing rules, whether someone, if it's an employee, has been seen not washing their hands, these are the potential challenges that you could face, and how are you going to, put measures in place operationally to stop them from happening. The next thing we need to look at is who's your A team. So if something does go wrong, if there's a slip, trip and a fall, if there is a breaking of social distancing rules, if there is someone, God forbid, who gets ill either on your team, or if there's a customer who gets ill, who are the people who are going to be leading it in terms of the response, and what's the clearest structure of reporting lines? With all will in the world, this doesn't happen when you'd like it to. Crisis can happen any time of the day, in any situation. So ahead of that, you need to put your planning in place and have clear lines of reporting. If someone's on holiday, you need to forecast that and then have a bit of a malleable plan in terms of how that works and who's on point to deal with it. The final point on this sort of slide is looking at who your best spokesperson is. It really is a skill talking to media. There's lots of processes they'll use. There's conversation pathways interviewers can take you down so that they get you to say stuff that you don't want to say, essentially. No one's born being excellent at media training or media spokesperson. People are born having an affinity towards, or having the skills to be good at it, but you have to train and you have to put yourself through some quite rigorous situations to make sure you're comfortable. And it's no good doing this once. It's something you've got to do regularly and top up. So I think identify who you want to be your spokesperson should stuff go wrong, and this will vary depending on what the crisis situation is. And then put them through media training. It's too late when the crisis happens to say, right, time for some media training. You'll be firefighting then, and you'll be, really trying to get out of the trenches. So identify who those people are, and then give them the regular training and put a process in place whereby you can update that training regularly. So even with the best will in the world and the best planning in the world and trying to forecast what can go wrong, stuff goes wrong. That's life. We work in a people business. One of the things that makes hospitality so great, but human nature, stuff does go wrong, and just, bad luck sometimes. So you've done all the planning, something's happened, what do you do? So the crisis has occurred, essentially. The first key thing is communication. So once something's gone wrong, you need to know exactly what's happened, what are all the facts, warts and all. And I think that final point, warts and all, is really key. If there has been a mistake that's made, it is human nature to, perhaps bend the truth or shine a light on things favourably. You need to create an environment where actually, the absolute truth can be given in trust, because this is crucial, or imperative rather, for looking at constructing a response. Because if you base a statement, or if you base an action or a sort of reaction to what's happened on the facts that you have, and then suddenly it turns out that they're not clear, that undermines everything you say from that point in, and that can be incredibly damaging to your brand's reputation. I think the sort of final point here, who you can call, this is really where PR agencies sort of earn their money and sort of come into their own. So even if you're not working with a PR agency, if something's spiraling out of control or something has the propensity to be incredibly damaging to your business, ring them up and see if you can, get some guidance or some support or some advice on what can be done. And then I guess the other point to make here is, with the communication element, hospitality is a sort of all-day business. It doesn't operate 9 to 5. So, and you can bet your bottom dollar, and I can vouch for this, having dealt with them in the past, that it's not going to happen at 11 o'clock on a Monday when everyone's fresh and raring for the week. Usually, it will happen late on a Friday night or over the weekend or over holiday periods. So, I think it's really key that even when you are late in that night, that you have that command structure and that communication line whereby you can identify exactly what's happened and get the person who's relevant for coordinating the response, the information as soon as possible, whatever time that might be. So it might be that you have a WhatsApp group that you set up for crisis comms, and if something happens, it gets shared on that. It might be that you work in different ways and you send a text message, or it might even be a phone call if it's in the middle of the night. But you've got to have those processes in place.
Just to add to that, never ever at the end of the week or the end of the weekend go, that went really well. No disasters. Because I guarantee a half an hour later, you'll get a phone call. So it's always when you least expect it.
Yeah, very true. So post-crisis. So this is the crisis has happened. You've sort of gathered the information. It's time for action. What are you going to do to defend the reputation of your business? What are you going to do to limit the impact that the crisis is going to have? So I think the key thing here is speed. So you need to very quickly, once you establish the facts, put together a holding statement. This is essentially, it's Ron said, it's what it says in the tin. This is something that will go straight out to media and any inquiries, basically just giving them the facts that they have at the moment, and showing that, you're on it as a business and this is something that's being dealt with.
Yeah, and don't be tempted there to put too much, like all the information in, because the more information that's out there, the more that can be interpreted and questioned. So it just needs to be
don't give any
sharp.
Loose threads that can be pulled on by journalists or grey areas. It's got to be clear and sort of stamp out any further questions. And we've given a little set of top tips on the right hand side of the page there that you can use as sort of guide to sense check any holding statement you put together. The crisis, although there's crises which are similar, fundamentally no crisis situation is the same. There's always a range of different pieces in play, forces in play at any one time to mean that every crisis is different. Therefore, there's no one size fits all or one glove fits all. An approach that if two pubs have the same slip or trip or illness, there's no approach that can be similar for both of them. Although there might be a similar response, there'll be difference and nuances, maybe about previously what's happened in the past with the business, whether it's something around that. So I think each crisis situation has to be dealt with on its own and in a unique fashion. And as such, it's very hard to give concrete advice on what you need to do. But I think some clear guidelines that you need to look at is that you need to acknowledge what has happened. And you need to demonstrate and bring back confidence of your consumers or whoever your sort of target audience is, that whatever has happened will not happen again, and that process has been put in place from happening again, and that your business is taking this matter incredibly seriously, and it's not just trying to play piecemeal and manage the situation away. I think that's really crucial. And then the way in which you convey that message, it might be that actually, putting forward a statement from a spokesperson that goes into a bit more detail is sufficient to achieving your goal. it might be that actually you feel that it requires greater action and it needs a personally delivered press conference or interview to offer your sort of heartfelt sincerities and go a bit deeper. But you need to just look at the situation, what just happened, and then sort of follow these principles to put together a plan of action that addresses it and reinstills confidence from your sort of consumers or your end users in you as a business and a brand. I think one thing to sort of add on to here is everybody is, everyone's got a phone in their hand when they're out. Most people, well, it's the same, hospitality businesses are on these or glued to these permanently. Everyone's self-publishing content every second of the day. And this drastically increases the likelihood and the risk of a crisis situation occurring and spiraling out of control. It's not just something that happens that brings media interest. You can create quite a big storm quite quickly on social media if a post gets shared and it shows people not adhering to social distancing or something else happening. And with the consumer nervousness as it is at the moment, and with the sort of volatile situation, this magnifies it even further. So this is something you need to be looking at in terms of planning, and something that you need to look at in terms of what the structure is for you to deal with this, because a negative news story will come out against hospitality business. Unfortunately, that's a sort of fact of life. You've got to do everything in your power to make sure that it's not you. And if it does happen, follow these steps in terms of mitigating it and stopping it at the source.
All without scaring you too much.
Yeah, not too doom and gloom.
Well, hopefully, that was a very quick whistle-stop tour of our sort of few top tips. Hopefully it was helpful. Obviously, we think public relations and media are super important. Bill Gates, he's quite a big deal. He also values PR. So worth considering, not just as a sort of random bolt-on to what you're already doing, but really part of the strategic planning and really part of your campaigns and your program. So make sure you consider it. And obviously we're on the other end of the phone. Our contact details are here at the end. If you'd like to get in touch with us, happy to chat through anything you're going through at the moment and see how we can help. So yeah, I think that's it. Anything else?
Yeah. Well, I just think, it's very hard to sort of distill PR down into a few slides. So appreciate a lot of what we've gone through might be very obvious to some of you, but we'd love to pick up and build on some of the stuff we discussed and look at how we can use it to sort of help your business, or just give you a bit of guidance if that's what you're looking for.
Thanks for listening to us, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Good luck.
Okay, cheers.